It was supposed to be a debate, a moment for students to challenge one of America's loudest political voices, a man who thrived on controversy and confrontation. But instead, that moment turned into chaos, a scene of panic, blood, and disbelief that would leave an entire nation stunned. On a Utah campus, as hundreds of young people gathered to hear Charlie Kirk speak, a single gunshot tore through the air and brought one of the most polarizing figures in American politics crashing down. Charlie Kirk, the firebrand conservative activist and close ally of Donald Trump, was gunned down in front of the very students he spent his career trying to win over. And in the hours that followed, America's anger, grief, and division would all explode at once. But what really happened that night? Why was Charlie Kirk targeted? And what does this shocking event reveal about the dangerous direction America is heading? The event started like countless others Kirk had hosted across the country. A crowded lecture hall, students armed with notepads, cameras, and sharp questions. Kirk standing at the front, confident as ever, ready to take on critics and energize supporters. For many in the audience, it felt routine. Another stop in Kirk's comeback tour. Another chance to spar with one of the MAGA movement's most prominent voices. But in seconds, the familiar atmosphere dissolved into terror. Eyewitnesses recall hearing a sharp pop, so quick and unexpected that some thought it was a prank. But within moments, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Blood began pouring from Kirk's neck. His body slumped. Screams filled the hall as students scrambled over chairs, desperate to escape. One student described it as surreal, like watching a water fountain burst from his neck. The man who thrived on controlling the room suddenly couldn't finish his sentence. And while campus security rushed in, chaos spread like wildfire. Videos flooded social media almost instantly, showing the once confident speaker collapsing in silence. But the story didn't end with the sound of that gunshot. It only began unraveling. To understand the weight of this tragedy, you have to understand who Charlie Kirk was. Born in 1993, Kirk rose from a young conservative commentator to one of the most recognized figures in American politics. He founded Turning Point USA, a student-focused organization that became a powerhouse in shaping conservative thought on campuses across the country. By his early 20s, Kirk was already rubbing shoulders with Donald Trump and his family. Trump praised him repeatedly, calling him a great guy, and crediting him with mobilizing the youth vote during the 2016 election. Kirk positioned himself as a warrior in the cultural battlefield, taking on liberals, academics, and anyone who challenged his vision of America. His events drew standing-room-only crowds. For conservatives, he was a hero. For liberals, he was a provocateur who thrived on confrontation. And that dual identity, adored by some, despised by others, made him one of the most polarizing figures in modern politics. And this clash of admiration and hostility set the stage for what unfolded in Utah. The evening's program followed a familiar format. Kirk gave a speech, then opened the floor for questions. Students lined up, eager to challenge him. One student in particular asked about a highly sensitive topic, the history of gun violence in America, and specifically whether transgender shooters were disproportionately involved. It was a question clearly designed to provoke. Kirk responded, as he always did, with statistics and sharp rhetoric. But the exchange grew heated. The student pushed back. Kirk picked up the microphone again, ready to counter the rebuttal. And that's when the gunshot rang out. Witnesses recall the chaos vividly. Students near the front row froze, then bolted as others screamed in shock. The shooter vanished into the crowd, leaving a room full of terrified young people and one of America's most famous activists bleeding on the stage. Security tried to lock down the campus. Sirens echoed across the university grounds. But in the confusion, the gunman slipped away. But behind the chaos on campus was a much deeper story. News of the shooting spread within minutes, and the first major voice to confirm Kirk's death was none other than Donald Trump. On social media, Trump posted, "The great, even legendary Charlie Kirk is dead. No one understood or had the heart of the youth in America better than Charlie. He was loved and admired by all, especially me." He offered condolences to Kirk's wife, Erica, and their children, who were reportedly present during the shooting. Other Republican leaders echoed Trump's grief, praising Kirk as a fearless fighter for conservative values. But what surprised many was the reaction from across the aisle. Even Democratic lawmakers, often Kirk's fiercest critics, expressed sympathy. For a brief moment, the political battlefield softened. A sense of shared humanity broke through the noise. And yet, as heartfelt as the tributes were, they couldn't erase the questions that now piled up. Yet, while leaders mourned, questions began piling up. Charlie Kirk's death didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a disturbing trend that has shaken America to its core. Just last year, Donald Trump himself survived 2 assassination attempts during the election campaign. Across the country, politicians, activists, and even local leaders have been facing threats at a scale never seen before. The United States, a nation built on free speech and open debate, is seeing its public forums transformed into battlegrounds of fear. Kirk's death added fuel to this narrative. Here was a man who built his reputation on showing up to hostile campuses, sparring with critics, and walking away victorious. Now, those same stages had become deadly. And this raises the question, was Charlie Kirk's death a random act, or something more deliberate? As the night went on, one chilling detail emerged. The shooter was still on the loose. Authorities launched a manhunt across Utah. Helicopters circled, police blocked off roads, but no immediate suspect was found. Speculation ran wild. Was it a politically motivated hit? Was the gunman someone from the student crowd, enraged by Kirk's answers? Or was it something more personal? Social media fueled theories. Supporters of Kirk saw it as proof of rising hostility toward conservatives. Critics suggested darker motives. But without a suspect, the mystery only deepened, and as long as the gunman remained at large, the fear lingered. But beyond the hunt for a gunman, the spotlight turned back to America's deepest divide. Whenever tragedy strikes in America, the conversation inevitably circles back to one of the nation's most bitter debates: guns. Utah, where the shooting happened, is one of the states with the loosest firearm laws. Citizens can openly carry loaded weapons in public without a permit. To many conservatives, this is a right that should never be compromised. To critics, it's a recipe for disaster. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Charlie Kirk himself was a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment, often clashing with activists calling for stricter regulations. And now, his own death was being used as ammunition in that very debate. Cable news erupted. Some framed Kirk as a martyr for free speech and gun rights. Others pointed to his death as proof of America's dangerous obsession with firearms. And while debates raged, one family's grief stood at the center of it all. In the end, beyond the politics, beyond the debates, beyond the headlines, this was a human tragedy. Charlie Kirk was just 31 years old, a husband, a father. His wife Erica and their children were reportedly present in the audience when the shot was fired. Imagine the horror of watching a loved one collapse on stage in front of you, with no time to react, no way to protect them. For his supporters, Kirk's death was not just a political loss, but a deeply personal one. They saw him as a mentor, a voice for a generation, someone who stood up when others stayed silent. For his critics, the tragedy was no less shocking. Even those who opposed his views could not deny the gravity of a young life cut short so violently. And in death, Kirk's legacy became even more cemented. The man who thrived on confrontation left behind a silence that echoed louder than any speech. And as the nation wrestles with grief and division, one question remains. A moment meant for debate ended in tragedy. A man who built his life around sparking conversation and controversy was silenced mid-sentence. The gunman remains at large. The debates rage on. America is left staring at itself in the mirror, wondering whether this was the loss of just one man, or a warning about the dangerous road the nation is heading down. Charlie Kirk's final moments may have been filled with chaos, but his death left behind a haunting question for every American. If even the spaces meant for free speech are no longer safe, what does that mean for the future of democracy?